Okay. Hold on. We'll get started in just a second. Bear with us. We've had a few last minute changes. Here we go. Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Candace Davis. I'm one of the leaders of Indivisible Evanston. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to hear from our distinguished panel of experts on election protection. With the upcoming midterms, we want to do everything we can to ensure that all the eligible voters are able to vote without any kind of interference. So we're going to be hearing from three panelists who will each present and then respond to questions. Kathy Johnson of our leadership team will be asking the questions. So please put any questions you have for any of the panelists in the Q&A box. Please don't put them in the chat. The chat's enabled if you need to put something in there, but please don't put your questions in there because we might miss them. So please put them in the Q&A box. And then once we've done our presentations and the Q&A, we'll be sharing some information on our sponsoring organizations. We're pleased to include several downstate groups this meeting and want to make sure you have all the information on how to contact them and follow them. I'll share that information and you'll receive the slides as a follow-up to this meeting, so you don't have to write everything down. We're going to record the meeting and we'll send a link to the recording as well as the slides to everyone who registered for the meeting. We know there were a lot of conflicting meetings tonight and there are weather issues, so we want to make sure that everybody can get the content. So we have a fantastic group of panelists tonight. We're going to hear from Ed Yohnka of ACLU of Illinois, Willie Shaw, the NAACP Evanston branch, and Liz Hayes representing Indivisible National. Unfortunately, Devin Remaker, the chair of Wisconsin, can't join us tonight due to weather-related issues in Wisconsin. It's storming there with periodic power outages, but we will have him in a future meeting. So first, I'd like to introduce Ed Yohnka. Ed's the Director of Communications and Public Policy at ACLU, Illinois. He's the longtime spokesperson for the ACLU of Illinois. He's the public voice of the organization. He appears regularly on television and radio and is widely quoted in state and national publications on civil rights, civil liberties, and key legal and legislative battles. He's been with the ACLU of Illinois since 1999, and before that served as the American Bar Association, including as a special presidential assistant in the Office of the President. The ACLU, as you all know, is at the forefront of fighting for our freedoms right now, and we are so glad to hear from Ed on voter protection and what we can do to help. Take it away, Ed.
Thank you, Candace. And it's really great to be here with all of you tonight. It's great to be back with Indivisible Evanston, to be with the folks at Indivisible National and our friends at the NAACP. I'm really happy we're here and talking about this topic because I think, we've reached this kind of moment where it's just abundantly clear that the administration has every intent to try to meddle to whatever degree they can with the midterm elections. And I think being prepared, understanding what's actually happening, being able to talk to our neighbors and friends about what that is, and thinking through how we work together to ensure a free and fair election in November is the kind of thing that we ought to all be spending our time right now thinking about. So I'm glad to be here and be part of it. I think we have to start in some ways with a recognition. And I don't think this will come as too much of a surprise or too much of an overstatement, for most of us. And that is that the President of the United States has a really peculiar relationship with elections. When he wins an election, it's free, it's fair, and it's a mandate. When he loses an election, it was somehow rigged and problematic, and we need to change our entire electoral system, even though there's no actual evidence of the fact that there was anything wrong. And, as we see in this second Trump administration, all of his vengeance and retribution is coming out in every way possible. And I think what we're about to see in terms of his obsession with relitigating the 2020 election in which he was defeated is going to play out in many of our lives here over the next several months. So I want to just take a minute to talk a little bit about how we see some of these signs of what's happening in terms of our electoral process, and then talk a little bit about how we're thinking about them going forward, and then alternately, and then additionally, excuse me, a little bit of how we should all be working together to push back against some of these excesses. And I think there's no greater example for me in terms of the way in which we're seeing, we're seeing the president sort of pursue these activities than the fact in the middle of a war, in the middle of spending billions of dollars a day on that war, in the middle of all of the other issues that we have as a country, with rising gas prices, with affordability at the grocery store being something real for most Americans. The White House's most important legislative priority is passage of the so-called SAVE Act. And, as many of you probably know, but just to be abundantly clear, the SAVE Act, despite what you hear in the rhetoric, is not simply a national voter ID law. Although, candidly, a national voter ID law would be bad enough. But in point of fact, the SAVE Act is a measure which would disenfranchise millions of voters across the country and put at risk of criminal penalty, thousands of election workers who work every day in our electoral system across the country in order to make it function, and put them at risk of being thrown into jail and prison simply for processing voter registration. So, writ large, what is the SAVE Act? The SAVE Act is a measure that would require voters, as they register, not simply to prove who they are and to affirm under penalty of law that they are a citizen and therefore eligible to vote, but actually to prove that citizenship using really one of two documents: either having a passport, or alternately having access to and possession of a stamped original birth certificate. Now, those two documents, it may be that many of us on this call have at least one of those documents. Maybe most of us have access to a passport. But we know from data that the federal government actually produces that up to 5 million people in the state of Illinois do not have a passport. And for those of you who've either gotten a passport recently or renewed your passport, you know that that is an arduous, sometimes expensive proposition, both in terms of the costs, and then if you have to, if you have to engage in, getting it expedited, that costs one even more money. And so effectively in that way, what we're seeing there is a poll tax on being able to register and to participate in the electoral system. But the SAVE Act, doesn't allow you to do that, and or doesn't allow you to register unless you have one of those two documents. You have to show those documents, and then if in fact there's some question about them, as I said, it threatens the electoral worker with a 5-year criminal penalty if they register anyone who isn't eligible. And so, that particular thing is, sort of a poison pill in there, because obviously, if I'm the electoral worker and I have any questions about your documents, my instinct is going to always be not to register you as opposed to registering you, because I could be at risk of going to prison if somehow, the information was incorrect. Now, this would wipe out, of course, all of the gains we've made in Illinois in terms of access to the ballot, the ability to register online with a state issue ID, the ability to register, on election day in person, the ability to register by mail, all of those things would essentially be wiped out under the SAVE Act. And then there's finally one last thing about this act that I think is, really important to keep in mind, which is that it requires that the name on your birth certificate or the name on your passport matches precisely with the name on your voter registration. So if in fact, you are someone who has changed your name from birth, either because of marriage or adoption or some other reason, and there are millions of people again in the state of Illinois who've done that, you would be at risk of either not being able to register or to having your registration challenged because those two documents don't match. Whenever I talk about this, inevitably somebody said, well, I hear all that. I know there are millions here and millions there, but what would the impact really be? And so, we don't have to guess about this, as it turns out. A few years ago, Kansas adopted essentially a state-based version of the SAVE Act. And during the somewhere between 18 and 24 months that the act was in force before a court struck it down, 30% of people eligible to vote in Kansas who tried to register during that time, so 30% of folks who tried to register who were otherwise eligible were refused registration because they didn't have documents adequate enough to meet the conditions that would be present all across the country under the SAVE Act. That is a huge number of voters who would be disenfranchised or not eligible to vote. And I think, again, this is clearly the goal of the administration, which would be to suppress those votes. We see other things that the administration is trying to do in terms of meddling in the election. Foremost among that is, as you well know, and one of the things the SAVE Act would require is for every state to turn over all of the voting information for every voter in their on their rolls, including their driver's license and social security numbers, to the federal government, so that the federal government could create, its national voter database. Again, voting is controlled by the states. It's intended to be controlled by the states. That data is protected by both state and federal law in Illinois and in many other states. But the Department of Justice under the Trump administration has gone around the country suing states, including Illinois, to try to obtain that data. As I say, they've done this in a number of states. A number of states, federal judges has already blocked this data. We've seen, courts do that in a number of different states. We've intervened in the Illinois case, along with Common Cause and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, to try to move that forward, to join the Attorney General to try to move that forward and block that. And of course, this is all being justified, under the notion that somehow if they have all of this voter data, they can compare it against federal databases and look at whether or not, there are non-citizens who are voting. Every study, including studies done, by the Heritage Foundation, literally the father and godfather of Project 2025, suggests that there isn't any evidence that non-citizens are voting with any kind of regularity in this country. In fact, just a handful of times. And when that happens, people are usually detected and they are punished as applicable under the law. So this is not something that's happening. But again, having these databases, being able to question and target people on the rolls from the federal government's level, and we can be sure that they will do that on the basis of zip codes and voting practices and voting patterns and voting habits. And so this is a very concerning thing in terms of giving them this data, which is one of the reasons that the ACLU and allies are fighting these kinds of efforts all over the country. Just a couple of other quick things, because I think this is, just to show, I think, the trend that we're seeing. I would remind you that just a couple of weeks ago, the acting Attorney General of the United States of America, Todd Blanche, was at a political event, a political-based event in Texas, and was asked about the possibility of ICE agents being staged at polling places around the country. And he expressed real dismay that anyone would be opposed to that because, after all, ICE agents, are just there to stop non-citizens. And since non-citizens can't vote, why should anybody be concerned about that kind of activity? And as we've seen, these masked, heavily armed, untrained ICE agents, have wreaked havoc across our communities, in Minneapolis, certainly in Chicago and LA and New Orleans and Los Angeles. The idea of having these violent masked goons, if it were, at our polling places is just not something that any of us should be comfortable with. Two other, and I'm going to come back and talk about that in a minute, but two other things I think we should be sort of on the lookout for. The president, with great fanfare, recently signed an executive order. You can always tell when he signs an executive order because he signs it and then he holds it up like a kindergarten art project of some sort. One of the things that was part of that order was that the president said that the federal government was going to create its own voter database, and that only voters who appeared on their database would be eligible to get mail-in ballots from their local jurisdiction, and that the U.S. Postal Service would determine whether or not someone was eligible to get a mail-in ballot. That's not the job of the federal government. Again, the Constitution clearly provides, the power to run elections to our, and applies that to our state and local governments, not to the federal government, much as he wants. Donald Trump does not have any role in election and election oversight. And as you may have heard, the ACLU and the League of Women Voters and some other voting rights groups have already gone to court to challenge that executive order. This is the third executive order around voting and mail-in voting in particular that the president has brought forward in the last 16 months. I think we can expect that this measure will be quickly batted away by the courts. But I think it's an example of the kind of thing we could try to see the administration try to do late in the election process to try to create havoc. And the last thing I want to mention is in terms of signs is that there has been, as you know, floated about by some of the president's allies, this kind of even sort of an executive order on steroids, in which the president would claim that China had interfered in the 2020 election. That's why he lost, not simply because he lost. And that as the result of that, the president would try to take over the elections, would insert all of the provisions of the SAVE Act that I've talked about in terms of registration, penalties, et cetera, onto our election systems across the country. And then this is the thing that I think is the most scary about this. According to this draft executive order that has, circled around, it would require every single voter in the United States to re-register using the provisions of the SAVE Act prior to the midterm elections. And when you think about what we saw in terms of Kansas and the people who were not able to vote, it's a very frightening prospect. Again, that executive order would be challenged. He doesn't have the authority to do it, and I think the courts would agree with that. But again, it's the kind of thing that would sow confusion for people about how our system works and where it works. So let me say a little bit in closing and then go to your questions, a little bit about how we're thinking about this particular challenge, if you will, as we go through the rest of the year, at least up until November. And the first thing is I will tell you that meeting with, voting rights groups, both here in Illinois and then all across the country, we are prepared to go to court to challenge any last minute changes or any other steps that the administration might take to interfere in voting for us here in Illinois. We are specifically ready and prepared if they try to deploy ICE officials or CPB officers to voting places across Illinois, targeting particular kinds of voting places in order to suppress the vote. We will be prepared for that. I think the other thing is that we are prepared if, in fact, the deployment is not necessarily government agents like ICE, but other people through like the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys or some other group like that. You may have seen just this afternoon that apparently the Justice Department is trying to move to reverse the convictions of the Proud Boys, in that for their actions around January 6th and their seditious behavior in trying to overturn that election. We will be prepared to go to court in order to challenge anything, both private or public, in terms of attempts to intimidate people at the ballot box. I will say to everybody who's on this call, one of the things, if we see that happen, it's going to be really important that we or our friends at the Lawyers Committee through their election protection hotline, it's going to be very important that we hear from people that that's going on, that there are people who are willing to stand up and be clients in those situations in order to challenge that. But I think we are ready to do all of we can in terms of court actions. We know that state officials, the Attorney General's office, and et cetera, are preparing as well, for these possibilities. And I think we'll be in a good place in Illinois where that is concerned. But I think there's three other things that we need to think about doing. And I want to start with one, and I saw this come up in the chat, and it's the reason I'm going to start there, is we need to participate in the system. We need people who are knowledgeable and who care and who are concerned about this system to sign up to be election judges, to participate in the system and to make it work for everybody. Because that's really, one of the great things we need to do is to push back against these messages that somehow this system is all rigged and it's wrong and people are being robbed. And so I think that's one of the places where, I think everybody can participate. The second is that I really would encourage people to familiarize themselves with the information and studies that are out there about the infrequency of voter fraud and the infrequency of somebody doing either showing up to vote in somebody else's name or registering when they're not eligible. Because I think one of the things is we've now lived through nearly a decade of, the person with the largest megaphone in the United States claiming that our elections are rigged, claiming that there's something wrong. And so we need to have that data. Even the Cato Institute recently did a study where they talked about of the millions and millions of votes cast going back to the year 2000, the instances of voter fraud are less than 1% of all of the votes cast. There is no massive voter fraud. And when we hear that conversation, either with our family or see an article in the paper, we need to respond to that. We need to write letters to the editor. We need to post online about it. We need to tell our friends. We need to talk to our neighbors or in our, bridge clubs or church groups or whatever it is, because I think pushing back against this, message about fraud is one of the things that we need to do. And, I just can't say this clearly enough. It is a fact. This White House and this president are so dishonest in everything that we say. And we have to begin to connect these things up. we have to say there's no evidence of this. They've never been able to prove this. They've done everything. They've gone back and rehashed all these things from 2020 time and time and time again, and there is no there. And so I think pushing back against all of that is something that we need to do. And here's the last thing I'll say to you, and I'm going a little bit outside of my usual realm of expertise. But, I really have been struck this week by looking at the fact that, by looking at what happened in Hungary over the weekend. The people of Hungary showed up to vote in numbers that there's no way that they could make that election and try to steal it fraudulently. The fact of the matter is that when people come together, when they join together in deciding that they're going to, when they're going to reject autocracy and move forward, that is the place where if we come out in those numbers, we will make a difference. I am fond of saying that there are two phrases in the English language that I think are the most beautiful phrases in the world that were not written by William Shakespeare. The first one is every year when pitchers and catchers report to spring training because I love baseball. But the second one is we the people. And in the end, the power in our government is not just assigned to three branches of government. In the preamble to the Constitution, the real power here is in the hands of we the people. And we the people can protect against this kind of election meddling simply by turning out and voting with our consciousness and voting our values and rejecting this, because authoritarianism is not inevitable. So Candace, with that, I will stop and take any questions that folks might have for me.
Thank you so much, Ed. Kathy has got the list of questions and
Okay.
she's sharing questions with you.
Thanks, Ed. Wonderful presentation. And I'm so glad you gave us things we can do because that's, we're all wanting to figure out what we can do. So one of the first questions was, what's the likelihood of the SAVE Act passing?
I think the
And
likelihood
does it require 60 votes to pass in the Senate?
So this is a really good question. I'm glad you asked. The likelihood of the SAVE Act passing is extraordinarily low. There are not right now. It would require 60 votes in the Senate. You'll remember it passed by a small margin in the House. Unfortunately, it passed on a slightly bipartisan vote because some Democrats went over and supported it. In the Senate, there are both Republicans and Democrats who are opposed to the bill. Even some senators who've talked about, like John Fetterman, who've talked about supporting a voter ID, recognize that this bill goes too far, and so they won't support it. There is this kind of, as my mother used to say, mostly about every idea I had, there's this cockamamie notion running around Washington that they can somehow do the SAVE Act in budget reconciliation. The problem is that reconciliation is limited to measures that involve spending and taxation. And there's no way that they're going to be able to justify including the SAVE Act in such a bill. So I think the chances of them being able to pass it are very low. That's the good news. I think the bad news, if I can, on that is that I think that just makes the likelihood that the president will try something increasingly erratic and incoherent through, executive orders more likely. And that's the thing that I think we really need to be on guard against.
There are a couple questions about ICE. If ICE shows up to our election sites, who do we call? What would we do? And can they confiscate ballots? And just a little bit about if ICE shows up at our
Sure.
public places.
Yep. Yeah, no, this is a really great question. So number one, you know, uh, the first thing is I'll say, and I want you to if folks can keep this number 1-866 ROUR VOTE. So 1-866 R vote is the election protection hotline.
That
That
was the
number
next question.
that number, if you see something on election day or in early voting, that is the number to call. Now, with specific reference to ICE, ICE does not have any authority to confiscate ballots, to actually enter the polling places themselves. And so, and because there are actually, state and local laws that bar anyone being armed inside an election place, they wouldn't be able to go in with their weapons. I know somebody's going to ask me, oh, well, they don't follow those rules anyway. What does that look like? This is where I think if there are, this is where what we're counting on is the ability to put in place either early on, let's say ICE shows up at an early voting site, is to be able to go to court to get an injunction to bar them from proximity to these election places, and keep them out. Part of the way we're going to be able to do that is to know what's happening on the ground across the state of Illinois. And so that's why, whatever you're hearing or seeing in your community is going to be so important. But again, to underscore, they do not have the power to enter the facilities. They don't have any part of the election process itself, and they cannot take ballots.
Okay. So he has threatened to cancel the midterm elections outright. Is that something we should be worried about, or more worried about the things that you've mentioned in terms of suppression and?
Yeah. I hear that. And of course, to say that our president says a lot of things is a bit of an understatement these days. But what I would say is, I look at the people that I really, sort of follow on this, from our National Voting Rights Project to the Brennan Center to people like Ari Berman, who covered these issues for years, all point out there is no mechanism for canceling an election. And he just doesn't have that authority. So I think I think one of the things that, people point out is we can't think that things are okay simply because the elections aren't canceled. We have to be on guard against the kind of meddling that could cause havoc in the elections themselves. And so, that's the kind of thing I think I think we really do need to think about as we're looking at what's going to happen over the next several months.
I think we have time for one more question, and that is, what's your biggest concern, if you had to pick one, about among all these things you've mentioned to us?
I think probably I think there are two things, and they're a little bit combined. I think that what I really worry about more than anything else is the president's constant prattling and screaming about this will make people feel like their vote doesn't matter, and will suppress turnout in a way that will make some elections closer than they need to be, which will give them space to call into question, results, and then try to meddle in the seating of the new Congress. I think that's what I worry about, most of all. And it's why I think we have to be, I will admit that, like, it's been much of a, it's been, I think for too long, I think many of us have looked at some of these things about, it was the Italians or it was the Ukrainians, or I can't even keep up with, it was Hunter's laptop that somehow, was the election fraud. I think that one of the things I worry about is they're just going to try to create, I've treated those like tinfoil hat conspiracies that we didn't really need to worry about. I think the harm that's done is that it makes people lose confidence in the system. And so, I think talking to people a lot in advance of the election about what their rights are voting in their particular state or jurisdiction, what they should be on the lookout for, and then, how to go about reporting abuse or any sort of irregularity. I think that's the kind of thing we need to be doing to push back against that.
Okay. Um, You've brought up a lot of really great things, and so this is a question of mine. You've done so many wonderful trainings over the year. Are you thinking about doing a training for those of us activists out here that want to learn more about all of these things that we can do? Oh,
We,
sorry.
yeah, the short answer is yes. I think, let me just say this. Yes. What we're trying to figure out is there a way for us to bring together a number of different groups from across Illinois? And I'm just thinking about Illinois for the moment. Across Illinois, where we can come with a consistent, simple message that everybody will use that gets us to that place of sort of pushing back against this. I think, frankly, I'll just say this for myself. I think we need people in every on every platform. I think we need people in the media helping to repeat that. I think we need elected officials. I think we need elected officials from both sides of the aisle. And it's one of the things that we've been thinking about is how do we create that dynamic to help push that out. We're not quite there yet. I think some of us worried a little bit right before the midterms, but then, that was a thing that kind of happened as a non-event. But, I think as we move forward, it's something we're certainly concerned about.
Wonderful. Well, count us in.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ed. We really appreciate you coming. And I know you've got to leave to go to another meeting, but we just wanted to say thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us tonight.
No, thank you. I'm always glad to be with you, and you can call and ask anytime.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're gonna move on. I'd like to introduce to you Willie Shaw. Willie chairs the Civic Engagement, Political Action, Voter Registration, and Social Committees of the Evanston North Shore branch of the NAACP. She was an educator for over 30 years, and she has a master's degree in education from National Louis University, which is what brought her to Evanston, and we're happy she's here. In 2022, she received recognition for her work as the District 13 recipient of the Peggy A. Montez Unsung Heroines of Cook County Award. And in 2025, she was Freedom Trailblazer Award honoree, recognizing individuals who've made a significant contribution to promoting freedom, equality, and justice in their community. Willie is not new to voter suppression, and we're looking forward to hearing from her. Take it away, Willie.
Thank you so much, Candice. Good evening, everyone. I am so happy to be here. Unfortunately, this issue is an issue that's close to my heart. I want to talk to you today, probably in about three parts. One is with the NAACP and what they have accomplished just in recent months. And the second part is what they do nationally in terms of voter suppression. And then the third part will be what we are doing locally with voter suppression. So you need to know some of these you may already have heard in news media, but the NAACP recently won a legal case protecting Massachusetts voters from the DOJ after a federal court dismissed the Department of Justice lawsuit that was seeking access to the unredacted voters registration records, of course, for millions of voters and residents in Massachusetts. The NAACP and other civil rights groups also have sued Trump over the mail-in ballot issues. Also, the NAACP and the Florida Alliance combined for retired Americans filed another lawsuit, and this lawsuit was to block the Florida Save the Act that we just learned about. So that one is in progress right now. And lastly, you probably already know this as well, that NAACP is one of the leading groups that's calling for Congress to invoke the 25th Amendment to the Constitution and declare Trump completely unfit to serve this country. So, first, I will say, in terms of voter suppression and all of NAACP activities, that local branches advocate at the direction of the national office. Now, we have what we call resolutions every year, and people from every state come to these meetings and decide upon issues that they think are important to the country. Sometimes the issues change, but primarily we have five different issues that stay on the forefront of NAACP. And one, of course, is political action and voter education, uh, general education in public and private schools, environmental justice, health and well-being, those types of things. But when the resolutions are made, different communities bring issues that they feel are necessary for the branch locally and at the national level to do something about, that they want to work on. So those resolutions are voted on every July. So we have one that will be coming up where there have been already over 200 resolutions submitted to the national branch. So I say all of that to say that what we do at the local level is in support of programming that the national branch has decided based on the resolutions and their primary interests that are always interests of the NAACP to vote on. So, one of the things, and I am sure we have not received it yet. So, some of this information that I'm going to share from regarding the national office has to do with the previous election. Some of it will be restored because it was very successful in the last election. But they have a program that's called GSSA, and that is a platform that is a database election strategy group. And that group gets information all across the country about issues that people are interested in, the types of people that live in different communities, the ages, the nationalities of people, everything that you can think of. And then the national then devises a GOTV effort. They did this in the last election in all of the 9 battleground the states, using a combination of direct voter contact, mass communication. They use targeted digital mobilization, SMS texting, as well as robocalling. And they have a new program that they started last year that we've been told will be implemented again this year. In fact, there's a call tonight as we are speaking that I cannot be on. That program is called Hustle, and it's also a database program where you're calling in a matter of minutes thousands of people. And on those calls, we've typically had about 2 to 3,000 people that are on those calls. Of course, the national always requests that we stay in contact with our with Congress, with our local representatives, and both House and the Senate. We always, when we're out, give those telephone numbers. But one thing we also do is not to just call our representatives. Sometimes we are fortunate in certain states who have to have representatives that are addressing the concerns of the states that they represent. But oftentimes, those people don't need to hear it. They're already there working and fighting on our behalf. Now, those numbers do count because we also have the NAACP has lobbyists in DC. So it's important that we let them know that we are in contact with our local representatives, because when they go to speak to Congress, they need those numbers to show that this number of people in this many states made this many contacts. So it's very important. But we also flood the Capitol switchboard, and we call the opposite side. Personally, I think that is even more effective. That you're calling the opposite side. Sometimes we do phone banking where we have just loaded up the phone and you can't even make any more calls. So everyone needs to know how their constituents are feeling, or those people that are not their constituents, that we are watching you, we know what's going on, and we want you to know that we know what's going on. The NAACP on the national website always has action alerts. So there is one on there now, of course, about the SAVE Act, and it asks you to support that by contacting your representatives, and it goes directly to NAACP and to those representatives that you've listed on there. Yeah, basically, last year, I believe a third program that we have not been made aware of will be implemented this year. But last year, we had two basic programs that we were using. One was called the Early Volunteer Program, and it ran from June to October. And then we had the Building Community Voices Fund that started in June as well, but ended in November. Now, the early volunteer program, uh, people in each of the branches across the country could get in contact with NAACP to volunteer. That is listed on their website. Local branches across the country make people aware of this. And last year alone, and we of course are hoping to increase that number this year, but we were able to recruit over 100,000 volunteers, particularly in the 12 battleground states. One of the main thing that the NAAC promotes is relational voting. And that means that 100,000 people from last year, we developed a relationship with them. They knew who we were by name, not just NAACP organization, but individuals. There are people that I spoke with last year that have called already and said, "What can we do? When is more information coming out about this election so that we can sign up to do whatever we need to do?" So that's what the relational voter is, that you get to know the people that are going to be voting in your local community. We have to really be aware of who these people are, what their needs are, how we can best relate to them, and finding out what it is they need, even when we are not sure of how to relate to them. We know how to ask questions. We know how to say, "Do you live in this community? Do you live on the North Shore?" We're able to register people in all of Cook County. You talk to them about what you do, how long you've been in this fight, why you've been in this fight, why you continue in this fight. Build a relationship with these people. This program also optimizes communication for the volunteers. They are given everything that they need. Now, you may hear me repeat this a little bit later. NAACP does all the flyers does not mean that local branches cannot develop their own materials and resources, but they have them for you. They have your flyers, they have your posters, they have scripts for phone banking, they have scripts for texting using whatever platform you are using. They have scripts for you to use on your social media, whether that is your website, it may be your Facebook page, it may be Twitter, but all of that is already done for you so that you familiarize yourself with it and go out and meet the public. The second uh, initiative that they had last year that they will continue this year is called Building Community Voice Fund. And that is not giving money to people. It is a fund that branches across the country use to apply for funds from the national organization to do their voters' registration activities. And so we've had, I believe it was about 38 grantees last year who applied for those programs. We were specifically looking for branches in those nine states that we mentioned before: Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, those states. But we were able to get 38 and cover all of those battleground states. So now, locally, as I said, every branch, not just Evanston, North Shore branch, every branch in the state of Illinois follows the national agenda. So one of the first things that we try to do locally here in Evanston on the North Shore is seize every single opportunity we can to reach voters. There are times where I have had a sign in front of my house, and I probably will do it again, that I'm a voter's registrar. You know, that you can contact me, and I have the information on there for our local website, our local telephone number, all of that information about where I will be in the community in terms of different activities that are going on. We really, really implement that relational voting piece when we're talking to people, because you must have a genuine interest in people. As was alluded to earlier, people are really, unfortunately, disenfranchised with our government. They don't care. We talk to people all the time. I've talked to people personally who have said, what difference is it going to make? And they are not just speaking about the current situation and circumstance that we find ourselves in today. It is absolutely worse, but they are people that have felt that way for many years. That last year, year before last election, 10 years ago, I'm not any better off than I was. I don't trust these politicians. They go around hugging people, shaking hands, promising you the sun, the moon, and the stars, and rarely deliver. So when you hear that sentiment from people, you really know that your work is cut out for you. And you have to spend a lot of time communicating with them, highlighting different stories, highlighting successes that you've had, why you are still out here, why the United States is worth it, you know, all those kind of things. Sometimes, we've offered incentives, or we actually always do have incentives on the table. It can be small things, we have the NAACP wristbands, and you don't have to become a member, different organizational swag material that you may have yourself. Um, Sometimes we've had people, we've had the t-shirts on the table, and they say, are they for sale? People that want to buy them? Yes. But if you don't want to and you would like to have one, yes, take it. Anything that you can do, you listen to people. We never tell people, well, this is not true. Well, this is what's supposed to happen. Well, maybe next election, we've got to validate where people are. If they are telling you that they have a difficult time, that nothing has happened in terms of politics, our leadership, whether it was local, state, or national, listen to them and validate that what they are saying is true for them. And how can we help them uh, become more interested, change their mind, give them as much evidence as you can that things can be different. We always do try to do at least three deputy registration trainings per year. We did two this year. We our quarterly and state conferences often, almost always, have voters registration information and speakers there to help us with doing our job better when we're out on the grounds in our respective communities. In Evanston, we try to, the Civic Engagement Committee, show up at as many festivals as and fairs as we can. I think last year we did about 20, fairs. We are always at the colleges. We started out, with Oakton several years ago, but now with the people at Truman know us, at Loyola they know us, at DePaul they know us. So reaching those students, we are in the process of getting a group going at Northwestern, which we have not had in the past in terms of going over doing sessions with them or partnering with any type of civic group that they have on campus there already. We always partner with the fraternities and sororities and local civic clubs in Evanston, like the Links. We now have a National Council of Negro Women, first time ever in Evanston. We've already uh, made contact with them and partnered with them because we understand that we cannot do this work alone. None of us can. So we need to partner with other groups as much as possible. We are constantly doing Senate forums, town halls. We live on social media as much as we can. We have done in February every year. So just a couple of months ago, we do an annual lecture series. We made sure that one of the Saturdays for that lecture series this year had to do with voter suppression, and what people could do about voter suppression, what they needed to be aware of. We have a list that I've previously shared with Indivisible, so when we go out, sometimes people walk along a table, pick up a piece of paper, some look at it, some never look at it again. So we try to make sure that we ask them about knowing what their rights are. Sometimes we turn it in to a game. I've had spinners at the table, and they're looking at something on the table. Would you like that? Sure. Okay. Answer two of these questions about voter suppression. And they actually enjoy doing it because it kind of takes your mind off of the things that you're thinking about that are not so pleasant, but it's educating you at the same time. We do, um, I believe this is probably about our sixth year where we've done a community awareness program in the local churches where we have met with, I doubt really that there are even 5 churches in Evanston that we have not gone to talk to them about voters education and voter suppression types of things. You may not be aware, radio spots are very important as well, but you may not be aware that there is a radio station called Radio La Difference, and it's housed on Asbury, 1900 Asbury. It's owned by a Haitian group, and so we have been able to be on there during an election cycle at least a couple of times a year, but also to speak with them about other issues in the community that are going on. So, with all of the information that National gives us and what I have shared about the 2 programs that they had last year and are continuing and going to add probably 2 more this year, they were able to reach about 14 million people in the last election. So that is something that we're really, really proud of. I was saying to someone the other day that I feel like I'm having a nightmare again. I'm a Southern person. I was born and raised in Mississippi. So I would hear my father talk to people in the community about voting. Now, we all know all of the different tactics that they use in particularly southern states to dissuade people from voting. But for the area that I was in, it was primarily job intimidation because most of the people worked in local jobs there in the community. They worked in the homes of white people as domestics, many of the people, or they were caregivers for their children. And that was the first thing that they would say once an election came about, making it very clear that if you voted at all or voted in a particular way, you would no longer have employment. So when I think about those things, the other thing was threatening physical violence was something that was really big in the South at that time. And this SAVE Act is something that reminds me of that nightmare and that we just cannot let happen again. That these suppression tactics, they may be different this year, but the intent of them remains the same, and that is to silence Black voices and other vulnerable voices. So at the NAACP, we are very, very proud to advocate on behalf of voters to ensure that the law is followed and that the rights of all voters is protected.
That Willie, that's so great to hear. And that, that's yeah. We know it's not new, but it's pretty scary. Kathy's got a few questions she'd like to ask you, and I think you has shared that sheet with us, and I think we can go ahead and send that to out as a follow-up to this meeting as well. So we'll scan that.
So we had a couple questions come in, Willie. Thank you so much. I'm the one who was at your table and I saw that list of
Yes, yes.
61 ways that we've suppressed vote. And I thought, well, if anyone is an expert on this, it's the NAACP, right? So I'm so glad you shared your expertise with us. So a couple of the questions that we had, someone asked about the Hustle program. A couple people asked about it. What do you use that program for? Is it mostly used for mobilizing members, or is it used similar to phone banks where you're IDing who your voters are, or what?
No,
So a
the
couple people
hustle,
asked about that program.
yes. Actually, the hustle program is a text marketing platform. Um, so when we've used it in the past, the national organization calls a meeting because we don't have it locally. And I understand that it's relatively, well, a pretty expensive program,
Oh,
but
sure.
National purchased it, and then they will call a national meeting with all 50 states. And we get on, it automatically has names, addresses, telephone numbers, but we only need the cell phone number. And you do, I would say you could do 50 to 100 text messages in a minute,
Wow.
you know.
Wow.
So it is very, very effective, on when we have those calls, and like we will have one coming up to do some of these, I believe one's coming up for Virginia. Uh, we will have anywhere from 2 to 8 million texts being sent that in that one session.
Wow. That's wonderful. Um, let's see. Another question that came up. This is a person who has volunteered for the state voter hotline, and she wondered if the NAACP has a similar kind of voter hotline, during the election itself. If you
Yes,
notice,
yes, we do. That number does change, so I don't have a number to give to you yet, but we do have uh, a voters election protection hotline. Is
okay,
that's the kind of thing you mean, right?
right, right.
Yes, yes, we do have. We'll have that
So if she
number.
wanted to know more about that, she should just contact you,
She
contact
should
you.
contact me, yes,
Okay,
because and
okay,
once I receive it, or I could just share it out to Indivisible. Yeah, when
okay.
we receive
Wonderful.
that number.
Wonderful. And then someone else asked if you're able, you started to recite the 12 states. Are you able to tell them, recite them all, or they were asking which of the 12 battleground states that you're working hard on?
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to miss any, but they were mostly southern states. It was
Mhm.
Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina. Let me get this brain. The other one was Texas.
Okay, okay. Thanks. Um, let's see. I think there were a couple other, let me just take a second. I'm trying to write them down as they come in.
Hmm.
Um, In your experience, what do you think most gets in the way of people voting?
Uh, I think even before we reach this point in history, because of and specifically African Americans, they just do not see that this country has made enough progress in terms of race relations,
Yeah.
and they have given up that it will ever happen. I have had people say, my mother said this, my grandmother said this, my great grandmother said this, my great great grandmother said this, and it's still the same. From some of the groups that have come into the country in recent years, and I would say, anywhere from 10, 20, 30 years ago, many of them are just afraid. They are afraid mostly about deportation, and it's not just Mexicans that you hear Trump constantly talking about. I've talked with many groups, and they are saying the same thing that many are not registered to vote. Many don't want to register to vote, even though they may be eligible or are eligible to vote, but they are afraid. They
Mhm.
are afraid.
Makes sense.
Well,
Kath, I think we need to, do we have one
yep.
more? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that was. all of the questions. I just wanted to say, someone asked earlier what we were doing to fight the state legislature save acts, and you mentioned that you've NAACP has filed suit in Florida, and I applaud you for that. So I just
Yes,
wanted to
yes.
point that out and, keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
It,
let us know, we're in it with you. Let us know how we can
Yes, yes,
collaborate.
yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for sharing your experience and your perspective. I don't want to cut off our next speaker. So, Liz, let's get to it. Liz Hayes is the Indivisible Nationals organizing manager for Illinois and Wisconsin. She's ours. She's a passionate organizer and educator with hands-on experience in voter protection, recruitment, mobilizing, training, and virtual instruction. Before she stepped into this role, she helped safeguard the vote as a voter protection associate with the Democratic Party of Wisconsin and later managed the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee's ballot cure hotline, making sure voters' voices weren't lost to technicalities. She's also supported state-based power building with state voices, strengthening capacity for grassroots organization across the country. In her current role, Liz supports the 155 and growing indivisible groups in Wisconsin and Illinois, helping to empower grassroots leaders to leverage their people power to defend democracy in their communities. Tonight, she's here to help us level up our organizing and election protection work in Illinois and give us some inside information on what's going on with Indivisible National. Thanks, Liz. Take it away.
Thanks, Candace. Hey, y'all. I'm so excited to be here with you all and just really grateful for your time and energy to think through this gigantic challenge that we're up against. Also, want to say thank you to Willie and Ed for both your inspiring work and also just your reflections on the necessity of election protection, not only in this moment of authoritarian overreach, but in really the long-term fight to defend democracy. Now, I'm the last speaker, which means that I have the fun job of keeping you engaged for the last 18 minutes. And so, do me a quick favor, if you would, sit up straight, get your shoulders rolled out, take a deep breath, just get ready and sit with me. I know it's been a long night and you have many other places you could be, but we'll get through it really quick. All right. So, as Candace said, I'm the organizing manager for Illinois and Wisconsin. There's 155 groups in those two states. And my role really is to leverage those groups and the group leaders' people power to be able to fight authoritarianism in their community, state, and across the nation. And as Candace said, I started organizing in voter protection. I ran the statewide ballot cure program in Wisconsin with WisDems, where our voter protection work was able to help re-elect Governor Evers. And so this work really runs very deep for me. And we know that we've been battling voter suppression for a long time. Republicans have historically preferred to suppress the vote rather than change their policies to make them more popular or more favorable for everyday voters. And as Willie has talked about so well, voter suppression is really rooted in racism and ableism and ageism and all sorts of attempts to subjugate and oppress marginalized voters. And while this is not a new challenge, we are navigating in some uncharted territory. And I know we all know that. Ed did a great job of talking through some of their already horrific attempts to suppress and subjugate our voters across the country. My only additions would be we've seen a ton of mid-decade redistricting in especially 4 different red states in an attempt to steal seats leading up to the midterms. And in Trump's executive order of March of last year, he sought out to do 5 really horrific things in voter suppression. 2 of them have been fully blocked by courts, but 3 are still remaining in play. Now, you're lucky in Illinois in your blue fight trifecta that I'm very jealous of, that you've been able to block another one of those efforts. But there is a mandate that DHS and DOJ review state voter registration files, which is currently underway in 11 states. There's a mandate that the Election Assistance Commission stop funding states that don't accept and use the voter registration form. That includes a show your paper requirement. And what part of what is blocked in Illinois is the mandate that the U.S. Attorney General and the Elections Assistance Commission take action and stop funding states with mail ballot receipts grace periods. And so there's just a ton of nonsense that they're trying to throw at us in advance of, I know we say it every election cycle, but the most important election of our generation. Say with me. And we see this on the national level, but locally, county clerks and statewide election commissions have really been taken over by election deniers and MAGA infiltrators who are attempting to rig and disrupt the continuation of free and democratic elections. One example that that All Voting is Local put out most recently is they created a list of the top 10 most dangerous election deniers. I'm going to drop it in the chat for you as a resource to pull up later. Included on that list is a current member of the Wisconsin Elections Commission who was one of the fake electors in the 2020 election and is a staunch election denier. That's someone who's at the highest level of authority in overseeing elections in the state of Wisconsin. So there has been infiltration in many levels that we have to fight against. And with this new territory that we're in, we have this really challenging balance to strike. On one hand, we want people to continue to exercise their right to vote, which means demonstrating to them that elections are vital and fair and safe and life-saving. And we have to, on the other hand, prepare ourselves, our movement, and our low information voters for the moment when the Trump regime attempts to steal this election, which, as we know, is going to happen really gradually, right? And authoritarians use their first election while in power as a test. It's a pressure test for the system. Can they get away with shifting elections from free and representative into superficial, where yes, we get to vote every 4 years, but the only option is to reinstate Trump and his Goonies. So this is our test. Unfortunately, this is the one that we really, really, really have to pass. And so where does this leave us? I want to talk through what our role is to counteract these attacks, to be able to protect our right to free and democratic elections. And I hope that from this call, it's clear that there are so many organizations that are taking on their own individual role in this fight to protect democracy. And we always love to say that democracy is a 10-lane highway. All you have to do is pick your lane. And so I want to talk a little bit about what Indivisible's lane is and where we see our role within this really important fight. So first, I want to name that we're following the lead of many partner organizations that have been doing this work for cycle after cycle after cycle. Most notably, All Voting is Local and Common Cause are two that we're really allied with and thinking through this work with. And Indivisible's superpower is our local people power. Our groups and our group leaders have been and can continue to be the eyes and the ears of their community to be able to flag issues before they become escalated problems. And so I want to talk through how we envision that working in an election protection space. Just like the NAACP, we've identified a handful of battleground states. For us, it's 5: North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Iowa, and Ohio, where we're going to run and go all in to run election protection programming using the skill sets and capacity that we have across our Indivisible network. One of the primary ways we're going to do that is to create an election protection corps in each of those 5 states where volunteers monitor their county boards and clerks' offices to be able to report and flag issues that arise in their communities, knowing that a lot of these election administration issues are coming as hyper locally as the ground up. And we're also planning to leverage our people power into rapid response actions. This should come as no surprise. Indivisible has been, and groups have been, very well practiced at rapid response work, but this is specifically for post-election in the event that a red line is crossed. Let's say there's an issue certifying the vote. There's folks not accepting the results of the elections. This may even come up when ICE are deployed to polling places. When we see these red lines crossed, we need to be prepared to leverage our people power and take action. And in states that are not battlegrounds, like Wisconsin and Illinois, both the states that I support, while we're not going to take a lead in election protection there, your organizers, like myself, can support groups in developing this type of infrastructure on the ground and to be able to drive some connections between our network and the election protection partners who are doing a lot of this work as well. And last but not least, our network and the groups that are a part of it have become incredibly important narrative builders in their communities. And they play a uniquely important role in articulating that really tricky balance that I just mentioned. So We have studies that show, and I'm gonna share another resource with you. We have studies that show that when we talk about the anti-voter agenda, we increase folks' likelihood of engaging in politics and motivating others to vote when we frame voting as an act of resistance. So to say this in more plain language, when we talk about the fact that there are people in power trying to take away our vote, we're more likely to increase someone's likelihood of voting and motivating their friends to do so, especially when we frame it as an act of resistance. We don't want this election to feel like business as usual because, frankly, it's not. So we need to talk to our friends and our family, and especially the low information voters in our lives, to frame this as an act of resistance because there are people in power who are trying to take that power away from us. And so, yes, again, that narrative balance. Elections are still safe to participate in. We must leverage our power in that way. And we are confident that Trump will try to steal this upcoming election. So we have this really tricky balance to strike, but you all are incredible messengers to send that message. And so I have three calls to action for you. I'm trying to keep to my assigned time. One, talk to your network, talk to your people, use that toolkit I just dropped. It's from Research Collaborative, All Voting is Local, Fair Fight Action, and ASO Communications. If you know Anat Shaker-Osario, you've seen her work before. This is an incredible narrative about how do we talk about our elections being stolen this year. Two, continue to flex your mass mobilization muscle. We need to be well practiced in being able to turn out when red lines are crossed because we have a feeling, we have an instinct that one of those red lines is going to be crossed in this election coming up this year. And then three, extra credit if you can do all three of these. Form a team to monitor your local county board, town, village board, to understand what actions they're taking in upcoming elections. You all are the eyes and ears, and you can catch issues before they become problems. And if you'd like support as an Indivisible group leader on building out that infrastructure, please reach out to me. I'd be really excited to help you build that work. Thank you all so much. It's been a lovely experience to hear from Ed and Willie and to hear all your great questions. If we have time for questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but also want to give you all space to do your wrap up for tonight. But a ton of gratitude for including me on this call. This has been a great experience.
Thanks for being here and sorry to rush you. I
All
think we have
good.
a few questions, Kath, right?
Yeah, there are a couple questions.
Great.
Um, Someone asked, and I'm a little confused by the question, what is the purpose of the April 25th demonstrations? I don't
Yeah,
know if
yeah, yeah, yeah.
what's April 25th versus
Great
May
question.
1st? We thought May
Great
1st.
question. I know,
Okay.
gosh, there's so many dates. It's wild. So April 25th is a day of action that's all about stopping ICE warehouse detention,
Oh,
creation, and building infrastructure. And so this is primarily being led by the Detention Watch Network, but we are partners on this action. And although it might not feel like it's related to election protection, all of this nonsense is linked, right? They want to build more ICE detention facilities so that they can have more ICE presence at the polls, so that we won't go out to vote because we're terrified, so that they win in the midterms. It is really all linked. And so that day of action coming up next week, a week from tomorrow, nope, that's not true. 11 days from today is a better, easier way to do that math, is all about restricting the ability to build additional detention facilities. And again, flexing our mobilization muscle to call for the end of that horrible, horrible effort.
okay. Sorry, I pull the questions off onto a separate
All good.
document. Okay. Where do you think individual groups should be putting their efforts in fighting voter suppression, which I think you somewhat have answered for us, but are there areas in Illinois to be worried about?
Yeah,
Like,
I think that's a great question. I think something I often talk about with groups across the state is I actually think it's much more challenging to be a group leader in a red and rural part of Illinois in a blue sea than to be in a red and rural part of Wisconsin, which is kind of purpley, sometimes magenta, sometimes light blue. I think that's a much harder context because there's not as much of a flashlight being shown on the work that's happening in those parts of the state. And so I'm confident, 100% confident, that there are parts of Illinois where voter suppression has really taken hold because it is a hyper local, village level, county level effort of MAGA infiltrators and election deniers to prevent any sort of blue stronghold from being possible there. And so I think that's a great place to build up a group's infrastructure by monitoring what's happening locally and frankly, to become a source of trusted information about participating in elections. Across all of our states, we have a misinformation impossible challenge. And so you all as indivisible groups have this amazing benefit to be that new narrative as community members, not as a party, not as the Democrats, not as Indivisible National, but as people and neighbors. And so I think that those roles feel really similar, even in a place where you have done so much great work in a blue state and so much progress has happened already.
Okay. A couple people asked if you would repeat the 5 states, but somebody put it in the chat. So I'll just direct people to the chat to see those states again. Some surprise Wisconsin's not in that group. Have things changed that much in Wisconsin?
Things are definitely changing, and I'm hoping that this is a blue wave that we can surf. That's how I'm framing it in my brain, but we can't lose this captured momentum. I mean, you all saw last week the incredible SCOIS win by 20 points, and I do have to say, huge shout out to the folks who are in the Chicago area and other parts of the state who came up to help canvass with us. We are so grateful for your support in making this possible. Yeah, I'm hopeful that Wisconsin is starting to take your lead, but only time will tell.
Okay. That was it for those questions right now, I think. So
Great.
thank you
Just
so much, Liz. You're a real inspiration.
really, yeah, what a wonderful bunch of speakers. Before we go, I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of information about our sponsors. Um, these slides I will send to you. Don't freak out that, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to show you a little bit about our sponsors. We're so pleased that we've included Charleston, Champaign County. There's a lot of Capital City, Illinois. There's a lot of wonderful groups involved. And all right, are you gonna let me go? I've got a slideshow on. Hold on. And we will send these out. So don't worry about all of this, but this is just a description of who they are, what they do, how to get a hold of them. Indivisible Chicago, NWSOFA, which has the busiest slide in the world, but lots of great information over here down the side and great links. Our Indivisible Naperville has a great link tree with all their information. Champaign County Indivisible has listed their upcoming events here. So take a look at that. Capital City, Illinois, it has listed their contact information, and they're having a May Day Strong event. Skokie Morton Grove, Lincolnwood, has a Facebook group you can hook up with. Indivisible Niles Main Township has some of their calendar information on here. You can also probably find that on Facebook. They have a members meeting. Charleston, Illinois is, I think, they've got a bunch of upcoming events. So check that out. They're holding an event on 425 for no detention centers. And Indivisible DuPage, one of our long-term favorites. They've got a volunteer fair coming up, and they've got their monthly meeting coming up. And then we're also joined tonight by Illinois Vote and Illinois Vote Champaign County. They promote civic engagement. They do deputy voter registrar trainings and voter awareness and voter registration. So you can check them out at their website. And Evanston, where I think we've already pushed you enough. Please sign up for our newsletter. We're sorry Devin couldn't be with us tonight, but we try to make all the opportunities in Wisconsin and locally available to everyone. So that was a quick review, but we will definitely include those slides in the follow-up and a link to this recording and the information from Willie. And Liz, I think you put, and a link, we'll let you know the link to the Communication Net Toolkit too. So I think all those things are great resources. And thank you so much, Willie and Liz. And also, he's already gone. So it was a great meeting, a lot of information, very inspiring. We've got our work cut out for us.
Yes, yes.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. I've got to save the chat.
Someone asked in the chat to be sure we actually send all the links because not everybody can copy and paste from the
Okay.
chat.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that,
Good idea.
yeah, that we don't make me watch the recording. Let me see if I can get the links.
Can you take us off of mute?
Uh-huh.
Oh,
Okay.
good meeting, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Save the chat. Got it. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Yeah,
night.
thanks. Good night, guys. Get some